All right, I have some announcements for you if I can find them here. One, I want to let you know and remind those of you that don't know that we are starting our online kids church, so Kids Club, this coming Wednesday, July 1st at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I'm so excited. We've had a 2-week break from hanging out with kids, and so we're stoked about that. If you are not a part of our parent emails and you don't know how to get into that Zoom meeting, would you fill out your online communication card, and we would like to get you everything that you need. So that's happening this Wednesday morning from 10 to 11 a.m. The next thing is the Nourishing Network. And last week I had said, hey, we're going to have this food packing opportunity, and we need 10 people. And we're at 8. We're super close. So if you were kind of like, I don't know if I can or can't, do they need me? They probably don't need me. We need you. There is a little bit of background check paperwork that you have to fill out before you get on site. So if you know that you'd like to go this coming Wednesday, July 1st, 8 in the morning to noon at Edmonds Woodway High School, you will fill out your online communication card, and I will give you all the information that you need to show up and be there and be part of our Brookview workforce. The Wednesday that we're all gathering together is not the only day that this is happening, and we have some other dates as well. And so if you'd like to be notified of other times in the month of July that you could serve, I know that would be a huge blessing to them as they are putting that together. Church in person. So next Saturday is July 4th, and we figured that a lot of you would be at home watching your fireworks or something. So we're going to modify our services just a little bit. We're going to have one service on Sunday morning, July 5th at 10:30 a.m. And what that means is if you are accustomed to watching church online, for that morning, just that morning, you won't be able to watch it until later in the afternoon when we post that online. So we'll film it that morning, and then Dave, who is like superhero status, we'll go home and render all those files and upload them, and it's quite a process, and so we will get that online as quick as we can. So go ahead and sleep in on July 5th and enjoy the luxury of that because you won't be missing church unless you want to come in person, and we would love to see you here on that morning, 10:30 a.m., which leads me to my next thing. You can go to brookviewchurch.com anytime during the week, including in this moment. For those of you that are in church right now, it is not inappropriate for you to pull your phone out, because if you're anything like me, you leave here and you go, oh, I was going to do something. So you can pull your phone out and just RSVP right now if you want to. So every time that we start a new weekend, we put a new RSVP to church out. And so when you're sitting in church by Saturday, that will be online and you can reserve your spot. Again, our services are not filling up. We just have to have those RSVPs for the health department and to be in compliance with what the governor's mandate is for the gathering of churches. So we know that that's a little bit of a pain, and we just appreciate so much your flexibility in this season. I did mention that online communication card, and if you go to brookviewchurch.com and you click on Contact Us, the top of the screen there, it says fill out your online communication card, and that is a great way to sign up for things that we talk about, to fill out prayer requests that you might have. Reach out to us. We would love to hear from you. If you find yourself struggling in this season, we want to just connect with you in some way. We are still the church, and we still love you, and we care about you, and we want to hear from you.
guys. That's so much stuff for me to do in like 42 seconds or whatever that is. We need longer intros, babe. I can't do it all in that much time. Oh, man. You did? You never panic. Oh, man. Well, I don't know about you guys. I am so ready for the world to get back to normal. I miss gathering with all of you right here face to face. Right now, there's only 300 of us in the room. And so, normally, I really miss seeing you guys face to face. I miss it big time. Some of you I'm connecting with because I'm intersecting, your world and my world are intersecting, but most of you, it's just not happening, and I miss you guys. I miss being able to see my friends. I miss being able to see the people that I love. You know what else I miss? I miss sports. I see that baseball's coming back, and of course, the NBA has a plan, college football, and the NFL say, no problem, we'll just play in the fall. You guys, we'll see. I'm a man of great faith, but I have lots of doubts about professional sports and if any of it's going to happen, because if between now and then things get worse, right, we'll see. And then more seriously, there's all the tension in our world right now that was ignited by George Floyd, and there's all the friction and the division and the racism and the injustice, and people have very strong, very emotionally loaded opinions right now. And as I talk with so many of you, there is this deep sadness because you see people you love posting things you don't respect. You see people that you love posting very extreme things, divisive things, and you're watching family members turn on each other. You're watching really good friends that have been good friends for years torn apart because they have opposing views. And if they could just sit together face to face in a room and have a real discussion, not just oversimplified, emotionally loaded thoughts that get posted online. If they could come together, they would sharpen each other. And it would be fruitful. But that isn't what's happening. And so they're losing respect for each other. They're losing love for each other. And we're watching people that we love just dividing. While our nation rethinks racism, which is a really good thing, we are watching people that we love and relationships between people that we love be damaged, which is really not a good thing. And if people could just sit and talk, man. So I don't know about you, I'm ready for change. I'm ready for the world to open up. I'm ready for community to happen again. And what makes this really hard, and really, I think for me, what makes it really hard is there's just no timetable. The truth is, don't know if or when things are going to get better, and the reality is they could very well get worse first. And so there are a lot of things that are creating fear and anxiety and this unsettledness. For me, I wonder, how is this going to affect our church? How is this going to affect our church? I mean, you guys, we had so much momentum, did we not, in the last year? So much momentum. We got this beautiful building. Our church was grown like crazy. We had new ministry sprouting up, new people stepping into ministry, new leaders. It was nuts. Something so special and so beautiful was happening here. And we all wonder, what's going to happen to our economy? How is what's going on right now going to affect things long term, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year, 2 years from now? I mean, how many people are going to lose jobs? And then there are very real health issues for us or for loved ones. I talked several weeks ago, Jen's dad lost his wife to ALS. Jen's stepmom passed away from ALS just a few weeks ago, a little over a month ago. And now Jen's dad has COVID. He's 64, and he is very, very sick. He's very sick, and it is frightening for us. I mean, you guys, I've never seen anything like this, never. And so what I want us to do is I want us to think about a very serious question. Does Christian faith actually help us through all of this? Does it really? And if so, how? How does it help us? And today, we're going to begin with what I think is an amazing conversation. One day, after seeing all the craziness in their first century world, Jesus asks his disciples, his apprentices, a foundational question. Here we go. It says, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. So today we're going to kick off this series by walking through this passage. We're going to walk through it. I think there's a lot of confusing stuff in here, and I want to get some clarity around it. And then what I want us to really do is think about, what does this mean for you and me? What does it mean for us as we follow Jesus in this unbelievably strange cultural moment that we find ourselves in? And the first thing that would jump off the page to a first century Jewish reader of this text is where the conversation takes place. Matthew sets the scene. He says, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi. Now, for you and me, right, we're like, yeah, okay, Caesarea Philippi, like whatever. Okay, but for a Jewish rabbi to travel to this place with his 12 Jewish disciples, this was a very peculiar place for them to be. So let me explain. Caesarea Philippi was about 25 miles, okay, about a 2-day walk from the Sea of Galilee, from Jesus' hometown. And it was not a Jewish city, okay? It was not a part of Israel. It was pagan. Now, the word pagan is not intended to be a derogatory term. It just sort of referenced the mishmash of religions and spirituality that were all across the Greco-Roman world. Now, the name of the city, Caesarea Philippi, was actually brand new in Jesus' day. The city was originally called Paneas, but just a few years earlier, the city was given by Caesar Augustus, like Roman Caesar Augustus, to Herod the Great, okay, the ruler of that area. And Herod, in turn, gave it to his son Philip for his 16th birthday. That's not a bad gift for your birthday, right? Oh, what'd you get for your birthday? A city. I mean, nothing says privilege like, I got a city for my 16th birthday. Thanks, Dad. Now, Philip renamed the city. He renamed it Caesarea Philippi after Caesar and himself. But prior to that, the city was called Paneas because it was home to the Greek god Pan, like P-A-N, like Peter Pan, who was actually named after the Greek god Pan. The city itself is built up against a rock face. We have an image. So it's actually built up against a rock face. And this is what it happened to look like in Jesus' day. Now notice the building on the left right here is actually built right up against the mouth of a very large cave. And the structure that was in front of it was actually a temple for the Greek god Pan. Now, inside that cave was a spring that formed into a modest river. And so here's an image of what that area looks like today. Very interesting difference. The ancients interpreted the spring in the cave to be like, they believed it was a portal to the underground, and they called it, get this, the gates of Hades. So for the temple, let's go back to that image. People would come from all over the Roman Empire to visit the temple of Pan, okay, right here, and which was built in front of that cave and in front of that spring, and again was considered the entrance to Hades. Now, Pan himself, and we've got an image of him, Pan himself was depicted as a half-goat, half-man creature. And like many, many Greek gods, he was famous for his grand sexual exploits. And I mean, let's not kid ourselves. That makes sense because he's super attractive, right? I mean, come on, ladies. And so he was actually a very promiscuous god, and so was, of course, then the worship of him. In fact, highly promiscuous girls in the first century, we have lots of names for them in our world. In the first century, they were called, get this, they were called Pan girls. And this is super relevant to the scene with Jesus and his disciples. In Greek mythology, Pan is the only Greek god to never die. He's the only Greek god to ever die. Okay, he's the only Greek god that ever died. And he died, we're told, through mythology. He actually died during the reign of Tiberius Caesar, who was Caesar when Jesus was born. So he died right before Jesus. Now, all of that for us to see, okay, this city, let's go back to the city, was not like a conservative Jewish city. People would come from all over the Roman Empire to worship Pan, and get this is where Jesus takes his apprentices to ask them the question, who do you say I am? Back to the text. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? Now, the Son of Man was like Jesus' favorite title for himself, right? And this is not Jesus referring to himself in the third person, like Kanye. But I mean, who doesn't love Kanye? But Jesus uses the phrase Son of Man. He uses it very deliberately. It's a phrase that's used throughout the Old Testament, and it has more than one meaning. In certain passages, in most passages in the Old Testament, it just means like a prophet. Okay, but in Daniel chapter 7, it refers to a very specific figure, a figure that's both divine and human, like divinity and humanity all in one creature, and that creature is called the Son of Man. The point is, if you're hearing Jesus in the first century, or if you're like us right now reading this today, and he calls himself the Son of Man, you don't know exactly what he means. And that's deliberate. It's designed to get you to pay close attention and to think, okay, Jesus, who exactly do you think you are? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. So they list off what they're hearing about Jesus everywhere they go. And notice that everybody seems to be agreeing that at minimum, he is some kind of prophet. But what about you? He asked. Who do you say I am? Simon, what about you? Right? James, John, what do you think? And you can imagine there was a long, awkward pause, and they're looking at each other like, It says, Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. So Simon here gives two titles, and I want to unpack each one at a time. Let's start with Messiah. Messiah is the Hebrew word that's translated Christ in Greek. So of all of the 12 disciples were Jewish men who could read in Hebrew, and the Old Testament is primarily written in Hebrew, okay, the language, that's the original language of the Jewish people. And the word Messiah was a Hebrew word. But when the New Testament was written, this is where it gets a little goofy. When the New Testament was written in Greek. Why? Because Greek was the most prevalent language of the day, much like English is a prevalent language kind of all around the world. And so, to make the story of Jesus accessible to as many people as possible, the writers, here, Matthew, they wrote in Greek. But here, Matthew keeps the Hebrew word Messiah. Okay, but just know this. Messiah equals Christ. That's what it means. And by the way, it's not a last name. As most of you know, Christ was not Jesus' last name. He is not Mr. Jesus Christ. It's not a name, it's a title. Messiah is a title from the Old Testament. There were prophecies about this king figure that would come. He'd come sent by God to liberate and restore the people of Israel. So by Jesus' day, because of all the oppression that they were facing, people were really on the lookout for the Messiah, for the Christ. And they believed that he would set Israel free from the oppression of Rome and he would usher in an age of peace and justice. And they were dying for that. Now, nobody knew for sure what the Messiah would be like. Some thought he would be a fierce warrior who'd muster up an army. Others thought of him more as like a fiery prophet who would turn people in the nation back to devotion to God. And they thought once we do that, then God will liberate us like he did with Egypt, like he did with Israel and Egypt back in the day. And their vision was that the Messiah would be a new Moses to lead the people to this new kind of freedom. And so there were all these ideas about the Messiah, but the people were on the lookout for the emergence of this man. And here, Simon says, "Who do we say you are?" We say you're the Messiah. We believe that's you. You are the Messiah. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Okay, now let's think for a second about that phrase, living God. That's kind of weird. But let's remember where they are. They're standing in front of this temple to Pan, the only Greek god to ever die. And so likely what's happening here is Peter's actually taking a subtle dig at the Greek god Pan. Peter's saying, okay, look, our God is living as opposed to that dead one that those people are worshiping over there. And Peter also says, you are the living God. Not only is he a living God, but you are the living God's son. That's interesting. And it's unlikely that Peter had in mind some like sophisticated vision at this point of God as a Trinity, like Father, Son, Spirit. That level of insight just didn't come for any of the disciples until much later. But it does seem that he recognizes that there is something very, very different about Jesus. It's like he's saying, okay, I don't get it all yet, and like the math doesn't add up in my mind, but Jesus, you have something that we don't have. You have some sort of mysterious relationship to the God that you call Father, and we think that in some way, and I can't explain this, but in some way, you share the Father's essence in your very person. But this moment is a massive turning point in the story of Matthew, because up to this point, you as the reader are well aware that Jesus is the Messiah and the Son of God. I mean, Matthew has written, number one, he wrote on the other side of Jesus' death and resurrection. But Matthew has written in such a way that you as a reader, like by the time you get to chapter 16, you're already in on the secret. As a reader, you already understand that Jesus is more than like a really brilliant early version of a TED Talk. But the disciples, they have yet to realize who he is. And so it's right here in this moment that they are awakening to the reality that Jesus is a rabbi, yes, but he's much, much more. Jesus responds, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven." Simon, that insight was given to you from God himself. I got to imagine Simon going, yeah, that's right. And he says, "And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it." Now, let me explain three things. Why does Jesus call Simon Peter? And what does he mean by the church? And then what in the world is he referencing with the gates of Hades? Okay, first, why does Simon become Peter? What's going on? It's interesting because in verse 16, he's actually called Simon Peter, which is, the double name. But that's the only place where he actually has the double name. He's either called Simon or Peter everywhere else. His name is Simon, and then Jesus starts calling him Peter. Now, here's what's interesting about this. In the first century, Peter wasn't like a name. There weren't a bunch of people running around called Peter. In the first century, it was just a common noun. And in the first century, what did the word Peter mean? Anybody? Rock. It just meant rock. And there's some really tricky things happening here with the translation, because Jesus most likely in that era spoke in Aramaic, and these guys, they were Hebrew, and then they wrote it in Greek, and then now it's translated into English. So let me just say, the best way to translate this, most scholars agree that actually the best way to translate this statement to Simon is simply this: you are the rock, and on this rock I will build my church. So Simon's name isn't Simon Peter any more than Jesus' name is Mr. Jesus Christ. It's like a title. It's a declaration. And it actually, what it does is it mirrors Simon's declaration. Okay, you are Jesus the Christ, Jesus Christ. And Jesus says, yes, and you are Simon the Rock, Simon Peter. And here, Jesus is referencing Simon's role in the kingdom of God, the role that he will one day play in the movement of Jesus on into the future. And I tell you that you are the rock, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. The church, and we get all kinds of ideas in our mind when we hear the word church, but the church is the movement of all the apprentices of Jesus all over earth. It's a movement. It's a movement of people, and it includes every apprentice of Jesus in all times, in all places, all over the earth. When Jesus said this, he didn't have in mind institutions. He didn't have in mind buildings. The church is all the people all over the world at all times who apprentice under Jesus and actually learn and practice his way. These people are the light of the world because they will bring light into darkness. And just as darkness can't extinguish light, only the opposite can happen. When light and dark come together, light always wins. Jesus says, the gates of Hades will not overcome it. And the gates of Hades was a Greek idea of death and evil. This is like darkness. And Jesus is standing outside, right, the temple of Pan, the gates of Hades, and the idea is that God, through his people, through the church, again, not an institution or a building, but a movement of those truly apprenticing to Jesus, those actively learning from him how to become like him, will go like light into dark places all over the world, and they will overcome it. I love the way scholar Eugene Peterson paraphrases this passage. He says, you are Peter, a rock. This is the rock on which I will put together my church, a church so expansive with energy that not even the gates of hell will be able to keep it out. And Jesus continues addressing Simon, saying, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Now, a lot over the last 2,000 years has been made of this verse. Sometimes you hear people refer to, standing at the pearly gates, right? And you're waiting outside of heaven in that moment where you think you're in, but you're not sure. And so you're just standing there waiting to find out if you're actually going to get in. And who is it that people usually envision standing at the entrance to tell you whether you're in or not? Peter, right? And it comes from the words of Jesus right here in Matthew. And there are all kinds of references to this in our culture. Now, I've got a couple of cartoon references for you. Number one, we've got pearly gates. And so here's Peter addressing this guy who's wondering if he's in. He says, you were a believer, yes, but you skipped the not being a jerk about it part. Then we've got a second one. Got one more. And here, Peter's looking at his MacBook, and he sees the person wondering if he can get in. He's like, sorry, your username and password just don't match. Sucks for you. It's probably because he's a Mac user. Actually, I just switched to a Mac. So people they've made a lot out of Jesus' words. And now let me read them again. He says to Peter, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. In the ancient world, the master of a house or the king of a palace would give his keys to his top servant or his highest political official. And it was really a role of honor because that person could allow people into the house. That is the person that would then be in charge of welcoming people into the house on behalf of the master. And Jesus is saying to Peter, when it comes to the kingdom of God, in a sense, I am giving the keys to you. Can you imagine that? Now, this does not mean that Peter is standing outside the gates of heaven, and when you die, Peter will decide whether or not you get in. It does mean that Simon Peter would welcome many into the kingdom of God. And you see this later in Peter's life. After Jesus was gone, Peter stood up in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost, and he spoke to all the crowds in the streets about Jesus. And we're told that more than 3,000 Jewish people decided to follow Jesus that day. And that day, the movement, like the church, was born. Later, in a pivotal moment in history, Peter welcomes a non-Jewish Roman soldier and his entire family into the kingdom of God. He says, you know what? This is open to you. In fact, this is open to non-Jewish people. And he throws open the doors of the kingdom to non-Jews. And that would forever, when that happened, it would forever change the movement of Jesus. After that, non-Jewish people came flooding in, and the church grew like crazy, and it spread all over the Roman Empire. And now it has spread to you and to me. And I don't know about you, I'm not Jewish. And so I'm thankful for Peter. See, Peter became the cornerstone. He held the keys to the kingdom. He flung wide the doors to God's kingdom for millions and millions and millions. And his leadership and insight were utterly foundational. He became the rock. He was the rock, and he held the keys to the kingdom. And then Jesus ends the discussion for the moment. And it's kind of abrupt. They're having this great moment, and it says, then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Now, that seems like strange, don't you think? I mean, what a killjoy. What a momentum letdown. He tells Peter, think about it. He tells Peter, he's like, yes, that's right, Peter. I am the Messiah. I am the King who is to come. Simon, God has revealed to you this great thing. God's going to do something marvelous. In fact, if you knew how big it is, it would blow your mind. And you, Simon, are Peter. You are the rock, and the whole deal will be built upon you. You're going to be at the center of what God is going to do. Now, keep it a secret and don't tell anyone. That's weird. But when you think about it, in Jesus' world, this idea carried with it all kinds of political implications. Because the world already had a ruler, Caesar. And Israel already had a sub-ruler, Herod, who was called the King of the Jews. To claim that Jesus was the Messiah was to claim that Caesar and Herod are the imitations to which Jesus is the reality. That our primary allegiance is not to Rome or to Israel or for us to America or to the Republican Party or the Democrat Party, but that our primary allegiance is to Jesus and the kingdom of God. And that calls into question every single power structure in the world. And that's why the moment it comes out and it goes completely public, Jesus is arrested. And he's arrested by who? By the Romans and by the political leaders in Israel. Men who have a vested interest in protecting the status quo, who see Jesus as a threat to their power and their privilege. So almost as soon as it comes out, Jesus is arrested and he's crucified. Now, Jesus was up for that, and he knew it was coming, but at this point, his time has not yet come. He still has work to do. So he says to his guys, hey, like, good answer, but just keep the whole Messiah thing on the DL, because we still have work to do. And once that comes out, the countdown to my death begins. Okay, now, that's a lot of explanation just to create clarity around the passage. What in the world does this have to do with you and me right now? Well, the entire story is built around the simple question, who do you say I am? Who do you say I am? In fact, very smart scholars point out that this is actually the turning point in the Gospel of Matthew. The entire Gospel of Matthew hinges on this moment. Everything before Matthew 16 is a lead up to the question, who do you say I am? And everything after is the follow-up to the answer, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And for Matthew, the author, this is an intentional attempt to get you and me, okay, the reader, to allow Jesus, with a gentle probe into our hearts, to ask us, who do you say I am? And this is a huge question. Because, guys, just like in Matthew's day, there are all sorts of ideas out there about who Jesus is. Are there not? I mean, there's Jesus, the wise sage. There's Jesus, the social justice warrior. There's Jesus, the political revolutionary. There's Jesus, the holy man, like in the class of Buddha or Confucius. There's a Republican version of Jesus. There's a Democrat version of Jesus. There's a military nationalist version of Jesus. There's even a vegan Jesus. Like, everybody has a Jesus, right? It's just like, will the real Jesus please stand up? And so how you answer the question, who do you say I am? It will define you. I really, really believe that. And you go, well, no, I really, really believe that. Your vision of God will shape you. Like, even if you don't believe in God, even if you think all of life is just a cosmic accident and we're all simply a product of time and chance, that vision of humanity and that vision of God, it will shape you. Even if you don't believe in Jesus as anything at all, you will be shaped by whatever you replace God with in your value system. Whatever you claim is actually ultimate, whatever you think is the meaning and purpose of life. See, even if you think life is meaningless, you will still come up with some kind of meaning, because human beings are meaning-making creatures. We cannot live without meaning. So you will be shaped by whatever you think the meaning and purpose of life actually is. If that's sexual expression, if that's individual autonomy, if that's wealth, if that's power, if it's success, or if it's intelligence, if that's more and more and more pleasure, whatever you think is meaningful, you will be deeply shaped by that. The mid-century prophet A.W. Tozer once said, "What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. We tend by a secret law of the soul to move toward our mental image of God." But can I just say, all too often, our mental image of God, our opinion about God, or our opinion about who Jesus actually is, it actually says far more about us than it does about Jesus. And here's what I mean. Like, if you were to go into a large bookstore like Barnes & Noble, are they even open these days? Can you go in there? I don't know either. But if you were to go into a bookstore like Barnes & Noble, assuming you could, and you go to the spirituality section and you find some books on Jesus, you could find all kinds of books that are sort of this reimagining of Jesus. These popular books that have been written in the last decade or two, books that throw out some sort of alternate identity for Jesus. Okay, he's not who the church has said he is. He is something else entirely. But here's what I think about that. I think that if we were to go and we were to read those books, we would actually learn a lot more about the author than we would the historical Jesus. Because here's what I'm saying. I'm saying Jesus can just become another projection. Like our own opinion, our own bias, our own desire. And this is why we actually need Jesus to cut through all of our projections and somehow meet us in a mysterious way. But notice, Jesus doesn't show up on page 1 of Matthew's gospel and say, I am the Messiah. I am the Son of the living God. Believe in me. That's not Jesus' style. He's much more subtle. He's much more sophisticated. So what does Jesus do? Jesus just goes around Israel doing Messiah things. Right? He heals the sick. He heals the sick. And it's like, who are you? The Son of Man. Well, who is that? He's like, who is that? Right? He goes around casting out demons. He goes around feeding you lunch, and then more lunch, and then more lunch, and then more lunch, until it's like, who is this Son of Man? But he never stands up. Not once does he stand up and just announce, I am the Messiah. He just does the things, and then he allows people to draw their own conclusions. And here's what I think. I think this is so like God. This is actually Jesus in the very act of doing that. Jesus is revealing to us what God is like. In a world that has become so skeptical to spiritual realities, the great question for so many is, well, why doesn't God make himself more obvious? Why is God like the great silence at the center of the universe? Why is God the great silence at the center of our soul? And I think there are many legit answers to those questions. But let me explore one really big one with you. I think it's because in the universe that God has chosen to actualize, love is the highest value. And love requires freedom and choice. Without freedom and choice, there cannot be love. And that means you have to have the option to live in relationship with God or not. And so most theologians argue that what God does is God veils himself. He veils himself. And it's not that God's like playing hard to get. It's not that he's distant and far away and he doesn't care about you or care about what's going on in the world. It's that if God were to come to you fully unveiled, he would overwhelm you. He would overwhelm your capacity for freedom and for love. And so God, out of great love and respect for your human dignity, chooses to veil himself. God chooses to be subtle, and it's on purpose. He chooses to go around doing the things that only God can do, and to, out of respect for you and out of respect for your humanity, allow you then to just draw your own conclusions. But there comes a time, and it is not on page 1 of Matthew's gospel, it comes all the way in chapter 16. But there comes a time when Jesus will gently come to you, and he will ask you the question, who do you say I am? Now, some of you are very, very new to Jesus. You are in the early chapters of your story and your experience of Jesus, and you aren't ready to address that question. You're just not ready yet. And so I just want to say, if that's where you're at, man, we are so glad that you're here, or we are so glad that you're engaging this and you're watching this online. We're so glad. And I just want to say, welcome. Like, you belong. You belong with us. And so take as long as you need. Just follow Jesus around. Just sit at Jesus' feet. Just listen to his teaching. Just consider what he has to say. Even try on his way, his worldview from like the inside out. Hold it up against every other worldview. any religion or life philosophy, and see if it does not lead you to life far more than any other option. But others of you, like, you've been doing that for a while. And you've heard an awful lot, and you've seen an awful lot already. And you're ready for Jesus to ask you the question. You're ready for, like Peter and the disciples, you're ready for that before and after moment. And if you do, and when you come to that same sort of place as Simon, you come to that same sort of place where you could say, yeah, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God, as in Matthew's gospel, that is a before and after moment for you. And then what begins to happen in the interior of your heart are many shifts. And so in the time that's left, I just want to highlight for you two shifts. And the first shift is this. It is a shift from fear to faith. Okay, imagine for a second that you're Simon, a young Jewish disciple of the Rabbi Jesus. Okay, he may well have been a teenager at this moment. Can you guys imagine how scary a city like Caesarea Philippi would have felt to him? Okay, so here's what you should envision: an Amish teenager taking their first trip to New York or LA or to Vegas. It would have been that kind of scary for the disciples. And then Jesus looks at you, and Jesus looks at you and he says, "You are the rock." And Peter's like, "Who, me?" He's like, "Yes, you. And on this rock I will build my church. I'll build my movement, the kingdom of heaven coming to invade earth, and the gates of Hades." See that right over there? The gates of Hades will not stand against the coming of the kingdom. It will not be able to stand against it. The kingdom of heaven is going to invade earth, and the gates of Hades will not stand against it. So Peter, you don't need to live anymore in fear. You don't need to settle for mediocrity or defeat and just merely survive. No, you can have faith for the future. Faith has been defined as confidence grounded in reality. When faith is something that's not confidence grounded in reality, it's foolishness. Faith is confidence grounded in reality. Jesus came to free us from fear because of a faith that is grounded in reality. Jesus is not a figment of my imagination or a projection of myself. Jesus is back from the dead. He's alive. He's good. He's involved in our world. He's involved in our nation. He's involved in our community. He's involved in our church and in my family and in my life. And so whatever comes or does not come, I don't need to fear because God is with me. It's been said that the opposite of fear actually isn't the opposite of faith actually isn't doubt. It's fear. And it's so easy right now to look at the state of our world and just feel fear. Fear over the coronavirus, fear over the economy, fear over the dividing relationships happening all over our nation, fear over the coming election, fear over climate change, and so many other things that we fear. But fear-based living is lethal. It's lethal. It will kill life because as long as we're convinced things need to go a certain way, that we cannot thrive or be happy unless our life goes as we plan, then in our futile attempt to maintain control over life, we will inevitably manipulate and bully and domineer, and we will never actually become people of love and peace. Why? Because true faith leads to great freedom. Faith leads to great freedom. And one way to frame the entirety of the spiritual journey that Jesus is inviting us to go on is this. It is a decrease of fear and an increase of faith. It's a decrease in an anxious striving for control and an increase in the capacity to trust and live in the love and the joy and the peace of the kingdom of God. The spiritual journey could be described like this. It is a step-by-step, layer-by-layer removal of fear after fear in your heart. Because people that don't live on fear don't need to control all the people and all the events of their life to be happy. So they become free to love and to live with courage. See, we so often buy into a lie that we must have certain things in our life if we're going to be happy. I mean, think about yourself. Like, what do you need to thrive and be happy? What have you convinced yourself that you can't live without? What if you're wrong about that thing? What if you're wrong about that person? What if you're wrong about that circumstance or whatever? What if you actually don't need it and you can thrive without it? What if all the things that I'm sure I need to be happy aren't actually essential at all? What if I'm in like the Trinitarian community of love and joy and peace, and the Trinitarian community is in me? And my home is not a dwelling, it's not an address, it's not even a country. What if my home is God? What if, as I abide in God and I make my home in Him and I come to rest in Him, He abides in me and makes His home in me and comes to rest in me? And what if, no matter what happens, nothing can come along and take that away from me? Not the coronavirus, not a collapse of our economy, not a job loss, not losing my house, not losing my health, not the increase of division in our nation, not even foregoing sports for a really long time. What if no matter what happens, nothing can take my home in God away from me? Not height, not depth, nor powers or principalities, not the far left, not the far right, not this law, not that law, not religious liberty or the lack thereof, not illness or health, not marriage or singleness, not my dream coming true or absolute failure. Nothing can take me out of the kingdom. And because of that, and this is what Jesus wants me to feel in my bones, because of that, I don't need to fear. Friends, this is a major shift that comes with the before and after. When we, like Simon, have a definitive moment with the question, who do you say I am? So I said there are two shifts. First, from fear to faith, and second, from triviality to meaning. Do we have that slide, Jennifer? Sorry, I just called you out on the internet. Okay, first from fear to faith, second from triviality to meaning. We're going to fly through this last one. Let me close with this. Guys, I just want to say, what if God is up to something unbelievable, like amazing in the world? What if He really is? And what if He has a significant role for you to play in what He's doing? And what if no one else can play the role that He has for you? Now, you think about Simon, right? He was a lower class fisherman from nowhere special. He wasn't an elite from Jerusalem or from Athens or from Rome. He didn't arise from a highly cultural or intellectual hub. And yet, when he gave his allegiance to Jesus, he became the rock. He was given a role to play in the movement of God on earth. And now, we have to be really careful here. Because of our culture, we have to be especially careful here. We are so influenced by like Western idealism or individualism. And so we can take a story about Peter and the church and then just make it a story about me and my future career. But in the story, Jesus doesn't kind of like do that. He doesn't go around like a good millennial parent. He doesn't make sure that each disciple has their own title and role and a trophy. right? He's not like, Peter, you're the rock, and on this rock I'll build my church, right? And then he looks over and John's like, he's like, well, yeah, John, you're the tree, and on this tree I'll grow my plums, right? Or you, Thomas, like Thomas, you're a reed, and you're gonna bend a lot, right? And you're gonna bend, but I'm gonna take this reed, and with your reed, I'm gonna weave my basket, right? He doesn't do that. Peter is unique, and Peter has a role to play that you and I do not. But still, Peter is a common example of the kind of thing that God does. He comes to very ordinary people and he calls them up into a significant role in repairing and healing our world, which is what it's all about. Now, we may have to redefine success or meaning, and we may have to do that differently. We may have to use the metrics of Jesus. We need to learn to use the metrics of Jesus and not Western culture, right? Not the metrics of Hollywood or Wall Street or whatever. And so that's an important piece of the equation. But if you come to the place that Peter did that day in Caesarea Philippi, then Jesus is saying to you, man, that is awesome. Because I have a role for you to play in the healing of this world. So follow me and learn from me, and I will fill your life with more meaning and significance than you could ever get anywhere else. You just keep looking at me, like you keep really looking at me, and then I'll show you what to do next, and I'll show you what to do next, and I will show you what to do next. And by the end of your life, you will be shocked at what I've done in this world through you. And by the way, we often think of God's calling in our life as the one big thing we're going to do. Well, what's my calling? What's the one big thing I'm going to do? Am I going to invent the internet? What am I going to do? But I'll just say, I don't think that type of thinking is very helpful. Because what happens then, if we're waiting for the one big thing is we sit around and we sit around and we sit around and we're waiting and waiting and waiting, and we let moment after moment after moment pass us by because we're sitting there waiting for the one big thing. And I would say that the significance of a life is never measured by one big moment. It is measured by the totality of all the moments added together. Whether big or small, it is every single moment. And right now, what's so frustrating for so many of us is that we are so thrown off and thrown out of our rhythm. Life is out of whack, and we're cut off from all that's normal and all that we really want to be doing. But the thing is that doesn't mean that you have to sit around then and wait until everything opens up so that you can be used by Jesus. I think our world is desperate to see Jesus, to experience Jesus, like truly people that are apprenticing and learning the way of Jesus. I think our world is desperate to see Jesus in you right now, wherever you are, whoever you're with, whether that's on Zoom or FaceTime or whatever it is. This odd cultural moment is a fantastic time for you to play your role. But in order to do that, you have to fix your gaze on Jesus, not yourself. You have to look at the brokenness in our world, and there's plenty of it to go around, isn't there? You have to be willing to look at the brokenness of this world and then look back to Jesus and say, what would you have me do, Jesus? How would you have me serve you, Jesus? Peter was faced with a question that led to a pivotal life moment. Who do you say I am? And my friends, that is a question that can change everything.